Hello. Oh, you'll be interpreting for me this morning? Great. I'm Brenda. Do you know how to pronounce my name? Perfect, that's very important. I will be talking about the ADA, that's the Americans with Disabilities Act, and how it relates to interpreters. These companies have employees here that want to learn about ADA interpreters, so I'll be explaining that to them. And I open the door to the community as well, so they can come and socialize with us. I really want you to match my signs with your word choice. Specific jargon will be used today. So please follow along with me and you'll be fine. Hello, thank you all for being here this morning. I'm going to be talking about the ADA and how it relates to interpreters. ADA is a law that's called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I chose interpreters as the topic today because you all wanted to come here and learn about interpreters and how they can relate to the ADA. I'm going to be doing a review of the ADA itself, and I'll be talking about a few key terms. There are 5 components related to interpreting in the ADA, and the last 2 are sort of the same thing. The first one is working with interpreters. Interpreters have strict codes of confidentiality. There are laws for your privacy. That number went down to 15 this past summer. If there are over 15 people, you need to have an interpreter. If there are less than 15, you don't need one. And that's the federal rule. There is a public something. There are various programs that benefit you. There's this thing called public admissions. People can go to it. And the third topic is any private workplace, like a restaurant. The fourth topic is communication. That communication lasts for an hour, a day, or a week. Do you all believe me? No, it has to continue year-round, 365. It has to be the same all around. The fifth topic the federal law covers I'm talking about legislation, like Congress members or newspapers. The last 2 we can sort of get rid of. The first 3 are what relates to interpreters the most. One problem that often comes up is working with the interpreter. Is that there may be an interpreter who doesn't know the words, who has never heard of that technical jargon. They're just sort of brought in, and they just try to do their best. And sometimes that will mean that the interpretation comes off making me sound like I'm kind of stupid, when really I know my stuff. So in order to get effective communication, the interpreter has to understand the speaker. If the communication is effective, then the speaking will be successful. If the interpreter doesn't understand the context, then the hearing audience members will think that I don't understand the context because the interpreter is speaking for me. So it's important that, especially on days like today, the interpreter knows a lot about the ADA, so they can match my language level. So those are the 3 topics related to interpreting. The first topic is working with interpreters. There are various regulations and responsibilities. That's the federal government's rules. If you have a complaint, you can talk to the SC. One issue is that there's no definition of a qualified interpreter. They just say you need a qualified interpreter. And the SC doesn't have regulations on what qualified means. The SC has certifications, but the ADA doesn't require a certification to be considered a qualified interpreter. One topic related to interpreting is considered reasonable accommodations, which is sort of like what you need to do to match your consumer's needs. And this can mean a lot of different things, and interpreters are considered a reasonable accommodation. So let's say you have a person who is wheelchair bound, and maybe they're too low to see something and they can't maybe see over the desk. A reasonable accommodation for that would be to lower that table so they can see. There are various examples. Like I said, you can lower the table, or if there's employment training, you can change things to accommodate them. There are various forms of accommodation, and interpreting is one of them. So who decides if you need an interpreter or if you can write back and forth? That's the boss's responsibility. Interpreters can work in staff meetings or training sessions, meetings. It depends on that person. One deaf person may need an interpreter in one situation, and a different person may not need an interpreter in that same situation. It depends on their accommodation needs. There is something called undue hardship, which means that the burden of getting that accommodation is too much for the company to bear. And many people or many companies will say, I can't afford this accommodation, and that is considered undue hardship. Like I said, it's too much responsibility for the company to handle to get an interpreter. And that's one issue related to interpreting. The second and third topics are connected because they're both related to the DOJ, which is the Department of Justice, and I'm going to talk about those two now. The third topic is called public accommodations. public can mean government things and private is private matters. It's very easy to confuse the two. So regulations are decided by the DOJ, and interpreters have a Department of Justice. There are two different definitions. The first is a certification. There are various certifications, and it's hard to tell which one is better than the other. RID has a certification. It can be hard to find certified interpreters. You may want a specific gender for a certain situation. It might be hard to find. You may need to fly in interpreters from another state if you need a certified interpreter. There are several good interpreters from deaf families, but if you need a certified one, they may not be readily available. You need to find an interpreter who can match the setting and the content. The sentence, a qualified interpreter, that's the legal jargon. It says, a qualified interpreter is someone who is able to interpret effectively, accurately, that's, precisely, and impartially. That means remaining neutral. You have to be able to expressively and receptively interpret. And you need to know the specialized vocabulary involved in that setting as well. And that is what constitutes a qualified interpreter. So a qualified interpreter should facilitate communication so that all parties involved understand each other. And effective communication really happens whenever the interpreter understands the deaf person. They need to be sure that they can effectively communicate. Impartially means that the interpreter is not supporting one side or the other, or discriminating against one side or the other. So parents often use hearing children when they go into the doctor's office. And the doctor should say, no, I'm sorry, your child cannot interpret for you. They cannot interpret it impartially. They're too close to the situation. So that discussion is very important, and it needs to happen in every situation. Specialized vocabulary means, let's say I might be having a problem with the interpreter, and the interpreter is doing a great job. They know what they're doing, they're skilled, but the specialized vocabulary is very specific, and it's very technical. Let's say it's like a science class, maybe like a medical school class, and a deaf student wants to attend, so they bring in the interpreter. And the interpreter is a very smart interpreter, very good at what they do, very qualified, but science was not their strong suit, so they maybe don't understand that jargon. So are they qualified or not? It's sort of open to debate. Using the specialized vocabulary is very important. some kind of services can be a commitment to communication. The state government you may need to research what the deaf person may want. In specialized settings, a different interpreter may need to be used, such as in legal situations. Interpreters need to be used for performance interpreting, such as plays or concerts, in classroom settings. Do you remember what I was talking about with the undue hardship? That idea is the same, but they have different something. And again, undue hardship just means that they can't provide that accommodation. The ADA and interpreters we need more help advising. Please contact me for continued services. Thank you.